I never thought a single touch could rewrite a year of silence. But that's exactly what happened the night my ex walked back into my life uninvited. My name is Claire Ashford, and until that evening at Delmonico's, I believed I had moved on completely. I was wrong about a lot of things that year, but I was never more wrong than when I thought I could sit in that restaurant and simply enjoy a quiet dinner with my friend, Grant Callahan, without the past finding a way to crash the table. Grant and I had known each other for almost 3 years by then. We met at a mutual friend's engagement party, back when I was still dating Derek Voss, and somehow Grant and I had become the kind of friends who could sit in comfortable silence for 20 minutes and not feel the need to fill it. He was steady in a way most people weren't. He noticed things. He remembered that I hated cilantro, that I always ordered red wine, even in summer, that I twisted my napkin in my lap when I was nervous. I never thought much of it. Friends notice things about each other. That's what I told myself anyway. I remember the first time I really registered him, not just as Derek's acquaintance turned mine, but as someone in his own right. It was a rainy Tuesday, maybe 8 months into knowing him, and my car had broken down outside my office. Derek was in a meeting. He couldn't leave, or so he said. And when I called Grant, half out of desperation, he showed up in 20 minutes with an umbrella and a thermos of coffee. No complaints, no sighing about the inconvenience. He just stood there in the rain with me while we waited for the tow truck, making dry jokes about my car's timing. And I remember thinking, almost as an afterthought, that I couldn't picture Derek doing the same thing without making sure I knew what it cost him. I didn't let myself dwell on that thought back then. I filed it away the way you file away anything inconvenient, anything that might require you to look too closely at a relationship you'd already committed to. Derek and I had history, plans, a lease with both our names on it. Grant was just a friend, a good one, the kind you don't examine too closely for fear of upsetting the balance. The breakup with Derek had happened 8 months earlier, and it hadn't been dramatic so much as it had been slow and exhausting, the kind of ending that drains you before it even arrives. Derek wasn't cruel. He was just absent in the ways that mattered. The kind of man who could sit across from you at dinner and still make you feel like you were eating alone. When we finally ended it, there wasn't a scene. There was just relief, quiet and unglamorous, followed by months of trying to remember who I was before I'd folded so much of myself into being someone he wanted. There had been small warnings along the way, if I'm honest with myself now. Derek forgetting my birthday dinner reservation 2 years running. Derek introducing me to his colleagues as my girlfriend, without ever once using my name, as if the label mattered more than the person attached to it. Derek's habit of correcting me in front of others. Small things. The name of a restaurant, the year of a movie, always delivered with a little laugh that made it feel petty to object. I used to tell myself these were just quirks, the ordinary friction of two people building a life together. It took me years to understand that quirks don't usually leave you feeling smaller every time they happen. Grant had been there for that unraveling, though never in a way that felt like an agenda. He drove 2 hours the weekend I moved out of the apartment Derek and I shared. He sat with me on a curb outside a U-Haul at 11 at night and let me cry without saying a single word about what a fool I'd been to stay as long as I did. He never once said, "I told you so," even though I suspected he'd seen the ending long before. I let myself. So when he asked me to dinner at Delmonico's to celebrate a promotion at his firm, I didn't think twice. It felt like exactly what our friendship was. Easy, warm, and complicated. I wore the green dress because it made me feel like myself again, not because I was trying to impress anyone. At least, that's what I told myself while I was getting ready. The restaurant was dim and golden, the kind of place with chandeliers that made everyone look softer than they actually were. Grant had gotten us a table near the window, and he'd ordered a bottle of the wine I liked without me having to ask. We talked about his new role, about my sister's wedding plans, about a hiking trail he wanted to try in the fall. It was easy. It was good. For the first time in months, I felt like myself instead of like someone recovering from something. And then I saw him. Derek walked in with a woman I didn't recognize, laughing at something she'd said. his hand resting at the small of her back the exact same way it used to rest at mine. My stomach dropped before my brain even caught up to why. It wasn't heartbreak, not exactly. It was something stranger, some old reflex kicking in, some part of me that still remembered how to shrink in his presence. Even after everything. Grant noticed the shift in me before I said a word. He followed my gaze, saw Derek, and understood immediately. I watched something change in his expression, subtle but unmistakable, a kind of quiet resolve settling into his jaw. I don't know exactly what I expected to happen next. Maybe I thought we'd just keep talking, pretend we hadn't noticed, let the evening carry on as if my past hadn't just walked through the door in a tailored jacket. But Derek noticed us too. Of course, he did. He always had a talent for finding the exact moment that would unsettle me most. He approached our table with that same easy, practiced smile he used to wear when he wanted something, and he introduced himself to Grant, like they were old acquaintances, instead of strangers, like this was a reunion instead of a collision. He asked how I'd been, in that tone that always implied he already knew the answer, and simply wanted to hear me say it out loud. Wanted to see if I'd stumbled over my words the way I used to. I felt myself tightening, my shoulders curling inward, the way they used to when I was trying to make myself smaller in his presence. And that's when Grant reached over, without any hesitation, without any dramatic flourish, and rested his hand on mine on the table, not gripping, not performing, just steady, just there. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't some grand declaration. It was quieter than that, and somehow, it said more than any of it could have. Derek's eyes flicked down to our hands, and I watched something shift behind his expression, some flicker of surprise he tried and failed to hide. Claire and I were just talking about the hiking trip, Grant said. His voice, even, unbothered. The same tone he might have used to discuss the weather. He didn't look at Derek when he said it. He looked at me. Derek wasn't even worth the full weight of his attention. I didn't correct him. I didn't pull my hand away. Something in me, some tired, worn down part that had spent 8 months trying to remember what it felt like to be chosen, instead of merely tolerated, simply let it happen. Derek recovered quickly, the way he always did, smoothing his expression back into something polite and unaffected. He said it was good to see me, that I looked well, and then he excused himself back to his own table, back to the woman, who was now glancing over at us with faint curiosity. I watched him go and felt, for the first time in longer than I could remember, absolutely nothing. No ache, no spiral, just the quiet, unremarkable relief of watching someone's presence lose its power over you. Grant didn't say anything right away. He gave my hand a small squeeze, then let go, and picked his fork back up like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just quietly rearranged the entire architecture of the evening. But I couldn't just move on that easily. My mind was reeling, replaying his hand on mine, the words he'd chosen, the way he hadn't hesitated for even a second. "Why did you do that?" I asked. Once the restaurant noise had swallowed us back into privacy, he set his fork down and studied me for a long moment, like he was deciding how honest to actually be. "Because I've watched you shrink in that man's presence for 3 years, he said finally, and I wasn't going to sit here and watch it happen one more time. I didn't know what to say to that. Something in my chest cracked open. Not painfully, but like a window finally being pried loose after being stuck shut too long. "That's not the same as what you did," I said quietly. "You held my hand like I meant it," he said, finishing the sentence before I could. "Because I did." The words hung between us, simple and unshowy, but they landed with more weight than anything Derek had ever said to me in 3 years of trying too hard. I searched Grant's face for hesitation, for some sign that he regretted saying it out loud, but there was none. He looked steady, the same way he always did, like he'd simply been waiting for the right moment to stop pretending. "How long?" I asked. "Long enough to know I wasn't going to say anything while you were still healing," he said. "But I wasn't going to let him make you feel small tonight either. Not while I was sitting right here." I felt tears building, not from sadness this time, but from something closer to disbelief. The strange vertigo of realizing someone had been quietly, patiently choosing you long before you had the capacity to notice. I thought about all the months he'd shown up without asking for anything in return. All the small things he'd remembered that I never thought twice about. All the ways he'd simply been present in a way Derek never had, even when we were technically together. I don't know what I'm supposed to say to that, I admitted. You don't have to say anything tonight, he said. I just needed you to know the hand-holding wasn't a performance for him. It was real. Whatever you decide to do with that is up to you. We sat there for a while after that, the noise of the restaurant settling back around us, Derek and his date, a blur in my periphery that no longer held any weight. I thought about how strange it was that the moment that finally healed something in me wasn't a grand confrontation or a tearful reconciliation, but a quiet dinner where someone simply refused to let me shrink. By the time we left the restaurant, the night air felt different, like something had finally settled into place after months of feeling unmoored. Grant walked me to my car, and neither of us rushed to fill the silence the way strangers might. The parking lot was mostly empty, streetlights throwing long amber pools across the pavement, and for a moment we just stood there, neither of us in a hurry to end the night. You know, I said, leaning against my car door, I think part of me has known for a while. I just wasn't ready to look at it directly. He nodded slowly, hands in his pockets. That same unhurried patience he always carried. I figured I wasn't going to push. You just spent months rebuilding yourself. The last thing I wanted was to be another thing you had to untangle. And now, I asked, now, I just wanted you to know the option exists, he said. Whenever you're ready, if you're ready, no pressure either way. I thought about all the versions of love I'd been taught to expect. The grand gestures, the urgency, the certainty that always seemed to arrive wrapped in some kind of performance. Derek had been full of declarations early on, promises that sounded enormous and ended up meaning very little. Grant had never made a single promise. He'd just shown up, over and over, in small unremarkable ways that somehow amounted to more than anything Derek had ever said out loud. When we reached my door, he didn't lean in for some cinematic kiss, didn't push for more than what the moment could hold. He just looked at me, steady as ever, and said, "Take whatever time you need. I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I believed someone when they said that. It's been 4 months since that night at Delmonico's. Grant and I have been slowly, carefully building something real, something unhurried, something that doesn't ask me to be smaller than I am. It didn't happen all at once. There was no sudden leap from friendship into something else. No single defining conversation that changed everything overnight. Instead, there were small accumulations. A dinner that turned into a second dinner. A hand that found mine again on a walk and stayed there. A quiet Sunday morning where neither of us felt the need to explain why we were still sitting on his porch, drinking coffee, 2 hours after we'd finished breakfast. I ran into Derek once more at a mutual friend's barbecue, and I felt nothing but a distant, unremarkable calm. The kind that only comes when you finally stopped needing someone's approval to feel whole. He asked, almost carefully, if I was seeing anyone. I told him the truth. He nodded, said he was happy for me, and for once I believed he actually meant it. There was no bitterness left in either of us by then, just the quiet closure of 2 people who had simply outgrown whatever they once were to each other. Grant's mother asked me last month, over Sunday dinner at their house, how long we'd actually known we felt this way about each other. I looked at Grant across the table, watched him smile before he even answered, and realized the truth was more complicated than a simple timeline. Some part of him had known for years. Some part of me had known too, buried under years of telling myself that steady wasn't the same as passionate, that quiet wasn't the same as real. I was wrong about that, the same way I was wrong about so many things Derek had convinced me to believe about myself. Real doesn't have to announce itself. Sometimes it just sits quietly beside you for years, waiting patiently for you to finally have the courage to look at it directly. Some people spend years waiting for a single dramatic moment to change everything. For me, it was quieter than that. It was a hand resting steadily on mine in a dimly lit restaurant, and a voice that didn't waver when it said the words I meant it. Sometimes the people who save us aren't the ones who arrive with fireworks. Sometimes they're the ones who've been sitting beside us all along, patiently waiting for the moment we're finally ready to be chosen the way we always deserve to be.